Welcome back to the Alsa Knows podcast. You guys know I love a good deep dive, and today we're taking a look at some really fascinating stuff on election integrity and how it all ties into globalization.
Interesting combo.
I know, right?
Yeah.
You sent me this awesome mix of notes and big excerpts, even a transcript from a YouTube interview.
Wow, that's quite the variety.
Yeah, it's perfect, though. Let's just see this from all different sides, you know.
Definitely multifaceted.
Exactly. So our goal today, to figure out what's going on with this whole voter suppression thing, especially all the stuff surrounding the 2020 U.S. presidential election, and then we'll zoom out and look at the bigger picture. How does this fit into the whole globalization puzzle?
Sounds like a plan.
And the best part, we have a pretty awesome guide for this deep dive. Greg Palast, this investigative journalist and forensic economist.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him. Seems like a real character.
You can say that again. In the YouTube interview, there's this part where he's like, Fedora means real reporter. And you get the sense he's not your typical, stuffy academic.
Not at all. More like a detective. I think I saw him with a magnifying glass once.
Yeah, maybe. But what's important is he's not all talking. He backs up his personality with serious research. And he makes this really bold claim that Kamala Harris would have won both the popular vote and the Electoral College back in 2020.
Hold on, really?
If it wasn't for voter suppression tactics. That's what he says.
Wow, that's a huge claim.
Right. He's talking about potentially 3.5 million votes being messed with. Enough to flip key states.
Enough to change the entire election.
Exactly. He even says he's ready to defend all of this in court.
Yeah.
So he's serious. This is not some conspiracy theory.
No kidding. So let's get down to it. What are we talking about here? What tactics?
Well, he uses some pretty intense language. Vote snatchers.
Yeah.
Scrub from the rolls. He even compares it to a test drive for future elections.
Yikes. It sounds like a movie.
I know, right? But this is real stuff happening. Tactics aimed at stopping people from voting.
Wow. Okay, so not just dramatic wording. Then let's break it down piece by piece.
Okay, so he talks about purge lists. What are those exactly?
Basically, lists of people they say aren't eligible to vote, so they get taken off the voter rolls.
Okay, but what's the problem with that? Isn't that how it should be?
Yeah, but these lists are often full of errors. People who should be able to vote get removed. And guess what? This happens way more to minority voters.
Seriously? So it's not just a mistake, it's like they're trying to keep certain people from voting.
Exactly. It makes you wonder about the whole process. Who's making these lists? What are they using to decide? And is anyone checking to make sure it's fair?
Right. Because if you're taken off the list, you might not even know until you show up to vote.
Talk about frustrating. Imagine thinking you can vote and being told no.
Yeah, that would make me want to give up on the whole thing.
And that's part of the problem. It discourages people from participating.
It's like a barrier to democracy.
Exactly. And it's not just purge lists. He talks about something called voter registration challenges.
Okay, what's that?
So basically you have these third-party groups that can say, hey, we don't think this person's registration is valid, and that can cause holdups and confusion at the polls.
So you show up to vote and suddenly you're being questioned.
Yeah, and it can be really intimidating,
Oh.
especially if it's your first time voting or you're not familiar with the rules.
That would totally throw me off.
And the worst part is these challenges can be based on flimsy evidence, and there's often no way for voters to fight back if they're wrongly challenged.
So it's not just annoying, it's like they're making it harder for people to vote on purpose.
Exactly. It's meant to make people hesitant to even try.
Okay, now I'm getting concerned. This all sounds pretty scary. How widespread is this stuff? Are we talking a few random cases, or is this a bigger problem?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's what Palast is trying to show. He argues that these tactics are not just isolated incidents. They're part of a strategy to keep certain people from voting.
People who might vote against certain candidates or policies, you mean?
You got it.
Wow. So it's like a manipulation of the system.
In a way, yeah. And it's not just happening in one place. He says it's happening all over.
Okay, so we've got the purge lists and these registration challenges. What else does he talk about?
Mail-in ballots.
Oh, yeah. Those became really important during the pandemic.
Exactly. And he says there are issues there, too. High rejection rates, misleading postcards that look like junk mail so people miss deadlines, and even challenges happening after the ballots have already been sent in.
Wait, so you can vote by mail and they can still challenge it later?
Apparently. And that's what's so concerning. It makes people wonder if their vote even matters.
Right. Like, what's the point if you can just be thrown out?
Exactly. It undermines the whole idea of a fair election.
Okay, this is a lot to take in, and it's pretty eye-opening. If you guys are feeling the same way, make sure to hit that like button and share this deep dive with your friends. This is stuff everyone needs to know. And if you want more content like this, be sure to subscribe and join the awesome Allison Knows community over on YouTube.
So we've talked about the what. Now let's get into the why. Why are these things happening?
Yeah, that's the big question. And that's where things get even more interesting.
Palast doesn't stop at just pointing out the problems. He tries to figure out the motivation behind them.
And what does he say?
He links these voter suppression tactics to bigger economic and political forces, specifically the rise of globalization.
Okay, so let's talk about that globalization.
Right.
I know it's a huge topic, but can you give us a quick rundown of what Palast is saying?
Sure. So globalization, it's often seen as this positive force, right? More trade, better communication, countries working together.
Yeah, but there's always a flip side to these things, right?
Exactly. And Palast says that while globalization does bring progress and prosperity, it also creates winners and losers.
Meaning?
He argues that it benefits corporations and the wealthy more than anyone else, and often it comes at the expense of workers and the environment.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. You get more interconnectedness, but also more inequality.
Makes sense.
Oh.
So how does he connect this to voter suppression?
He argues that this economic imbalance is tied to the weakening of democratic processes.
Meaning?
Basically, he's suggesting that the people who benefit from the current system are the ones who are trying to suppress the votes of people who might challenge it.
Oh, so it's like they're trying to protect their own power.
Exactly. They don't want things to change because they're doing pretty well under the current system.
So how does he back this up? Does he give specific examples?
He does. He uses stories from his investigations, especially his work on the impact of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but not sure exactly what they do.
They're supposed to promote global financial stability, but Palast says they often push policies that benefit rich investors while hurting local economies and communities.
Oh, so it's like they're helping the rich get richer while everyone else struggles.
That's his argument.
Yeah.
And he uses Argentina as an example.
Okay, what happened there?
So back in the late 90s, Argentina was going through a rough time economically. The IMF came in with a bailout package, to help them out.
Sounds good.
Well, there were strings attached. They told Argentina they had to implement austerity measures, things like cutting social programs and privatizing state-owned industries.
So they were forced to make these changes in order to get the money.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the idea was that these changes would stabilize the economy.
Did they?
Well, according to Palast, they had the opposite effect. Poverty rates went up, unemployment skyrocketed, and there was a lot of social unrest.
So those austerity measures just made things worse for everyday people.
That's what Palast argues. He says the IMF policies may have been presented as necessary for economic recovery, but they really just serve the interests of wealthy investors and corporations.
At the expense of the Argentinian people.
Exactly.
So he's connecting these global economic policies to the whole voter suppression thing.
Right. He's saying that those in power might use these tactics to stay in power and prevent any challenges to the status quo.
It's like a way to control the narrative and keep things going their way.
Exactly. And what's even more concerning is he's not just talking about developing countries like Argentina. He says it's happening in advanced democracies like the U.S. too.
Wow, that's a pretty big statement. It makes you think about the relationship between money power and how fair our elections really are.
Right. It raises a lot of questions about how our systems work and who they really benefit.
Definitely something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And it highlights the need for us to be more aware, more informed, and more engaged in the whole process.
Absolutely. We can't just sit back and assume everything is fine. We have to be vigilant and hold those in power accountable.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, this is all super fascinating, and I'm sure our listeners are finding it just as thought-provoking. Before we move on, I just want to remind everyone to hit that like button and share this episode if you're enjoying our deep dive into these important issues. And if you're craving more insightful discussions, be sure to subscribe to Allison Knows on YouTube and join our amazing community.
It's kind of scary when you think about it, how connected it all is.
Yeah, it's like he's pulling back the curtain, showing us how all these things work together.
Yeah. And how they're used to influence elections and even whole countries.
Makes you feel kind of powerless, right? Like, what can we even do about it?
Well, that's the thing about Palast. He doesn't just point out the problems. He actually gives us ways to fight back.
Really? So he's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at all. He really emphasizes how important it is for people to get involved, know your rights and hold those in power accountable.
It's easy to feel like our individual actions don't matter, right? Like we're just one person against this huge system.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But Palde believes that even small acts of resistance can make a difference.
So what does he suggest? What can we actually do?
Well, he talks about practical things like checking your voter registration, making sure you're registered correctly, and knowing the rules in your state.
Okay, so basically just being informed.
Yeah, and knowing your rights at the polls, especially if someone tries to challenge you or give you a hard time.
So knowledge is power.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting your own vote. It's about standing up for other people who might be facing discrimination.
Oh yeah, like speaking up for people who might not know their rights or who are easily intimidated.
Right. He encourages people to get involved in voter protection efforts, support organizations that are fighting against these tactics, and speak out against injustice whenever they see it.
So it's about collective action, right? Like coming together as a community to demand fairness.
Exactly.
We're stronger together.
And it's not just about voting. It's about looking at the bigger picture, like we talked about with globalization, challenging economic policies that create inequality.
Exactly. He wants us to be more critical of the promises of globalization and demand policies that benefit everyone, not just the rich and powerful.
So we can't just sit back and be passive consumers in this globalized world.
Nope. We have to use our voices and make conscious choices to create a fairer system.
It's about taking action and demanding change.
Right. And he walks the walk, too. He doesn't just talk about it.
Yeah.
He uses these really interesting investigative techniques like going undercover and digging through corporate documents. Oh, yeah, he's like a detective for democracy. Remember, he's a forensic economist.
Yeah.
He knows how to follow the money.
Exactly. And he uses statistical analysis, too, to find those hidden patterns and connections that most people miss.
It's so cool how he finds this stuff that no one else seems to be talking
I
about.
know, right? It's inspiring because it shows that we don't have to just accept what we're told or what we see on the surface.
We can question things, dig deeper, and demand evidence.
Exactly. And that's where access to information becomes so important. If we want to make informed choices and hold those in power accountable, we need to know what's really going on.
That's why investigative journalism is so important.
Absolutely. It's about shining a light on the truth and making it accessible to everyone.
So true. And it leads to a really interesting question. If access to information is so crucial for a healthy democracy, how do we deal with all the secrecy and privatization of data that's happening these days?
Ooh, that's a big one. It's something we all need to be thinking about. We live in a world where data is power, and those who control it have a huge advantage.
Yeah, it's like everything is being locked away behind paywalls and algorithms and government secrecy.
And that makes it harder for regular people to understand how decisions are being made and who's benefiting from them.
And it makes it harder to hold those in power accountable. If we don't know what they're doing, we can't challenge them or demand change.
Exactly. It's like they're operating in the shadows.
So this problem goes way beyond the tactics that Palast is talking about. It's a fundamental issue with how democracy functions in the digital age.
You got it. It's a challenge for sure. But it's also an opportunity. As we become more aware of these issues, we can start to push back against the secrecy and reclaim our right to know.
What can we do? Any suggestions?
Well, we can demand transparency, advocate for open data initiatives, and support organizations that are fighting for greater access to information.
And we can be more critical consumers of information ourselves.
Yes, questioning the sources we rely on and looking for diverse perspectives.
So it's not just a technical problem, it's a political one.
Exactly. The way information is controlled affects everything. Power dynamics, social justice, the whole future of democracy.
It's all connected.
It really is. This is a conversation that needs to happen, and the more we talk about it, the more we raise awareness and empower each other to take action, the better.
I love that.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, I just want to remind everyone to hit that like button and share this episode with your friends. These are important conversations to be having. And if you're enjoying a deep dive, make sure to subscribe to Allison Knows on YouTube and join our amazing community.
It's pretty amazing how he ties it all together, you know? Voter suppression, globalization, like they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, it's a whole new way of looking at how power works. It's not just about who's in charge. It's about who controls the information and the money and how they use it to shape our world.
Exactly. And he doesn't just leave us feeling hopeless. He actually gives us a way to fight back.
Yeah, he's not just pointing fingers. He's giving us tools.
Right. It's not about just sitting around and complaining. It's about taking action.
And he gives us specific things we can do.
Absolutely. Like checking your voter registration, knowing your rights at the polls, supporting those organizations that are fighting voter suppression.
They might seem like small things, but they can add up.
Exactly. Think globally. Act locally.
We can be aware of the big problems, but still make a difference in our own communities.
That's what makes his work so powerful. He's not just talking. He's showing us how to be better citizens.
And I think that really resonates with our listeners. They're smart, they care, and they want to make a difference.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of investigative journalism. People like Palast who are willing to dig deep, ask the tough questions, and hold those in power accountable.
He's like a watchdog for democracy.
Exactly. And his work reminds us that we don't have to just accept things the way they are. We can demand better. We can create a more just and equitable world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Be active. Don't be passive. Whether it's checking your voter registration, supporting an organization, fighting for change, or just talking about these issues with your friends and family, every action counts.
I love that. It's about realizing that we all have a part to play in shaping the future.
Exactly. It's not about waiting for someone else to fix things. It's about taking ownership and becoming active participants in our democracy.
Well said. That was an amazing deep dive. We covered so much ground today. From voter suppression to globalization to the future of democracy, it's a lot to process. But hopefully our listeners are feeling inspired and ready to take action.
I hope so too. This is just the beginning of the conversation. There's so much more to explore.
If you're feeling inspired, make sure to hit that like button and share this episode with your friends. Let's get people talking. And if you want more insightful content like this, be sure to subscribe to Allison Knows on YouTube and join our amazing community.
Remember, knowledge is power. And when we share that knowledge, we can make the world a better place.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok. And be sure to like, subscribe, and share your comments on the Allison Knows YouTube channel. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep those brains buzzing.